through each of these. Clearly, the most familiar and widely used pair of these oppositional tensions is the conversation-text dialectic. It's embraced by both management and organizational scholars. It's come to symbolize the kind of recursive interplay between organizing as conversation and organization as text. It transcends the saying, the said, and the past and the present and the here and now. Of significance in this is the way that Taylor et al. Connect or hold these two constructs at play, continually linking them in a recursive process that really avoids separation, selection, and privileging. Implied in this is a durability of fleeting and change. And I think a lot of people wouldn't put stability and change as part of that dialectic, but I really believe it's an absolutely critical part of that. And so as a part of that dialectic, you can see it in the analogy that Taylor used, that texts are like crystals and with form and pattern that can be stored and displayed, while conversations are random, chaotic, and fleeting like smoke that dissolves fast. Thus, the text-conversation dialectic reframes the age-old tension between change and stability by situating both constructs as continuous and evolving, with staying power that spans time and space. It also draws on two other concepts in here, co-orientation and imbrication. And I think the playing out of these two is another way to kind of look at what's going on in this dialectic. Because the tensions between co-orienting, in which communicators engage in dynamic actions to get something done, and those patterns that Harry was talking about this morning that become unquestioned and build on, I think is an extremely important part of this and could be developed even more within this theory. So one way that I think this particular one could begin to look at new entailments and new concepts is to play off of some things like tightly coupled activity coordination and loosely coupled organizational self-structuring that comes within that. There are other things within this. This whole notion of corientation and disorientation. We heard some papers here about organizations that never got stable. Organizing processes that didn't. A lot more work could go into looking at that whole notion of disorientation and destabilizing as a process within that development. The next dialectic focuses on multivocal and univocal. Personally, in looking at the management of this is one of my absolute favorite ones out of the. It's theoretically managed, I believe, through transcendence, which I have the positions of the many and the one through aligning opposition into a new frame. Meta-conversation, as the site where organizing is the usness or occurs as the entity, is really the way in which this becomes, these binaries or tensions become recursively placed together in the property of language. So you end up with successive embedding of conversations in text and text on text, which transcends and makes the pluralism of many voices the networks of local conversations and multiple communities of practice coming together. So it's the usness that has that entity status, and it's larger than any of the communities of practice, as noted. Jim actually says the unitary and the pluralistic worlds of talk encounter each other on a single plane. And so meta-conversation manages that plurality and unity by transcending them very recursively. And it draws on opposition and pulls rather than abandoning it. Similarly in this, I think Jim took the notion of ambiguity as transcendence as another way of pulling together integration and differentiation. And the duality that comes together through inclusion and exclusion. So I think it's another form of transcendence that's in this. So it's central to the construct of meta-conversation to have this whole notion of integration and differentiation. The one that I think is the potential for the rightness of this theory is in the meta-actor and in the narratives and in the contests that are among those. Central to this is the meta-actor who speaks on behalf of others, translates, references others. The meta-actors represent the collectives or the inner collectives. And I contend that it's through the meta-actor that meta-conversations transcend the tensions of the univocal and the multivocal. The spokesperson preserves these tensions in many ways through the way that stories are played out in narratives and the struggle. So the macro actor speaks as a collective by simultaneously embracing and juxtaposing the voices in the narrative and by playing out the drama. And these narratives of sense-making also create more meta-conversations with villains and heroines, as actor network theory would kind of suggest. These contests, or moments of struggle, in my mind, are the way in which new collectives begin to develop. And I think it's another way to begin to look at it. Jim has fully resisted the notion of power. He really doesn't like this construct. He occasionally puts it in a book. You can look it up in the back, and there are a few references to this. But I really still believe that this cannot be ignored in some form or fashion. But I would suggest extending this part of what's going on here to develop other kinds of dialectics that are in this. Those dialectics, and we heard them in some papers, talk about legitimation and delegitimation, which are in ways that people are actually enacting some of the conversations and meta-conversations about power. Tim Coombs' paper dealing with the firm, trying to look at authorization and deauthorization, and Jim's new book that's working in that way, also talks about it. Rather than talk power, we could also talk consensus and dissensus. I mean, I think there's something about that dialectic and that tension that's lived out in these narratives that would really extend this work and would provide us a way to get the power element into here in a highly interactive and recursive way rather than as a static construct or a determinate construct. So, in effect, both transcendence and connection manage the dialectics among the unitary and the plural. The organization, simultaneously one and many, continually plays out the tensions of these opposites through the unity and the polemic quality of narratives that live this struggle out. And so I think this part of the theory is really ripe for a lot more work, and it's exciting to see this happening here. The third dialectic is the flatland of the micro and the macro. And it emerges, of course, through a duality that gets dissolved. In many ways, the theorists who favor, as we know, macro orientations often look at the organization writ large. Micro orientations often look at the micro interactions that's coming from it. But these are levels, and they get, if you put them there, they are separated dialectically. They're separated from each other. And in that way, the dialectics really preserve the duality, if we make that kind of notion. But Taylor contends that the flatland is invariably situated, circumstantial, and locally realized in time and space. He joins other scholars like Bowden and Weick and Giddens, who also, I think, try to get rid of this macro-micro duality and then turn around and